What is our purpose in life? It's probably the big question that everyone asks. What are we here for? But it's an interesting question to ask, because from a religious standpoint, purpose in life generally means to serve a deity and achieve some sort of reward. But from an atheist point of view, it can be much more broad. What is our purpose in life? And the base answer you tend to hear is, we define our own purpose. But that sort of demeans the entire process that went into figuring out that we define our own purpose, to sum it up like that. That's what I'm hoping this video can show. So let me begin by defining 4 things. 1. Purpose. The intended use of something. Its purpose is whatever it is intended to do. 2 and 3. Subjective purpose and objective purpose. The difference being, objective purpose is something that is already in place without any thought process or anything like that. Subjective purpose is something that we ourselves interpolate as purpose. And 4, life. Life I'll define as any self-replicating organism comprised of one or more cells. I actually like to think of life as anything that self-replicates, but according to cell theory, one or more cells. So, there are my 4 definitions. With that in mind, I'll start off by saying something that might come off as a very devoid meaning of purpose, but the purpose of life is to reproduce. To all philosophists and theologists watching out there, don't worry, I'm not that disconnected. I will explain. So why do I say that? Because that's simply what life does. It defines life. It's present in any society, even sentient society. It is the underlying purpose of a society, is to reproduce. If you go back to our origins, you can see why. Abiogenesis. We are the product of this soup of chemicals where the ones that self-replicated went on to form the first organisms. The ones that didn't were still there. There were still molecules and chemicals in this soup that did not self-replicate, and they had different purposes. Everything can have subjective purpose, but everything has a defined objective purpose. There can be an infinite number of subjective purposes, but there is a defined amount of objective purpose. For instance, the objective purpose of a rock would be to be hard, or something like that. But a subjective purpose of a rock could be to be used as a paperweight. Similarly, for life, an objective purpose of life would be to reproduce, or self-preservation. The two can usually coincide, but sometimes can conflict psychologically. A subjective purpose of life would be to become a lawyer or baker, to help humanity. You know, that sort of thing. But what's interesting is when you throw sentience into the mix, because suddenly we have this ability to think and comprehend and come up with subjective purposes. But does that mean that the objective purposes are no longer objective? For instance, you can find people in society that have no sex drive. They have no desire to reproduce. So what defines them? What is their objective purpose? Because usually to reproduce stems from the fact that reproduction went into self-preservation. It's an interesting question, but simply put, their objective purpose just isn't to reproduce. They just don't naturally do it. That's not what they are intended to do. It's what we would think they would be intended to do at some point in time, but they aren't. So to simply put it, they have a different objective purpose. Their objective purpose is still self-preservation. They're usually not suicidal or anything, but often subjective purposes are much more prevalent in their life. If you want to think of it this way, and I don't mean to demean it by any means, but they're simply unsuccessful life. That doesn't mean they're not successful in other areas, but they are not successful in the goal of life, which is to reproduce. It's the basic goal of life. Sentient life, there are subjective purposes that can dominate your life, but the end goal of life is to reproduce, to pass on your genes, to preserve yourself, or at least a portion of yourself, because that's just how we do it. So what's this all getting at? Well, I've already provided the answer. Remember the question, what is our purpose in life? Life itself reproduces. That's all life is. That's how we define life. We like to think of life as something special, but life is just another term. Our purpose in life is to reproduce. This is something that we find in common in all human beings. Although, remember, the original example with people that don't have sex drive is the exception, not the rule. But it is in the areas where we impose subjective purpose that we find our purpose. It is in the areas where we are like those people who don't have sex drive that we find our purpose. It is the thing that gives us our humanity. And essentially, we are fighting to make subjective purpose of our life the dominating factor. If you wanted to gather humanity under an umbrella, then you could say the purpose of our life is to combat the purpose of life. Cheers! Think about it.